For those of you that are new to Ramsack events, a very warm welcome, and I can see from the call list that we've got some seasoned regulars, so welcome back. I'm joined today, I'm not going to do much of the speaking today. I'm joined today by two colleagues that we work with very closely, Rupert Squires and Ben Leach from Ramsack Partners Information EXP. And we work closely with Rupert and Ben on a number of the projects that we integrate for our clients in the Microsoft suite, specifically around document management, which of course is the subject of today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to be fairly live demo, so Ben and Rupert are the ones that have got sweat dripping down their brow right now because, as I always say, kind of live demo is the curse of all technical people. But morning to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you for hosting us. And just, I guess, building on what Dan said, so we've worked with a number of Ramsack customers where they're looking to do something maybe a little bit more advanced with the way they manage their information or their files, particularly using Microsoft 365, SharePoint, and Teams environment. My role is the client director at Information XP, but today my role is a hands-on clicky person. So Ben will be guiding me through this and helping show how this all comes to life and how, and I can bring some stories from the field of how we've helped customers in the past, and maybe that provides some context for you. So Ben, good morning.
Thanks, Rupert. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, just a very quick intro from me. So my role is to help organizations get the most out of their information management, particularly around SharePoint and Microsoft Teams in the Microsoft 365 space.
Excellent. And we've got some pictures up here just to mix up a bit. Obviously, you can see our faces on the camera, but I've got a little bicycle there because I don't mind a little cycle every so often. And Ben is a big dog fan. And Dan, first aid, is probably here to rescue us should we need it. So without further ado, I think, there we go. Just so you know, and this will be said at the end, I think it's just touching on what Dan said, the slides will be available after the survey. This is recorded. That survey is super quick and fast, and it's just a Microsoft form to let us know, how we did, good, bad, ugly, and maybe any takeaways that we can take if we do this again, what you might see differently or things that you missed out. And Dan, he's managing the questions in the Q&A, and he'll shout and moderate accordingly. So I want to start by talking about an example of a customer we have right now. And they picked up the phone to us and said, look, we've got something we've called Project Spaghetti, and we need you to help us fix it. And we understand, if you separate all the stuff we've got in the cloud, all our files, it's all fine, but it's not right now. It's tangled, it's a mess. And we've looked at it and we don't know where to begin. And this is a very typical scenario of what we're seeing. So, towards the beginning of this year, a lot of people turned on SharePoint in a hurry because they needed remote working. VPNs maybe to on-premise systems weren't quick enough or fast enough. They wanted some of those clever features which allowed them to work on the same document at the same time. And so they said, look, turn it on, it will just work. And to a degree, it does. But what they then saw is, well, some of their early adopters started creating areas like my test site or Ben's area, as they started experimenting. But they didn't have a separate, test area to do this in. So that then got mixed in with the real work. And the real work then would be teams like sales and marketing. But their other challenge was they hadn't actually thought about how they were going to structure their information. And it all looked great on day one because it was all tidy and organized. But then, somebody created a separate area called the marketing webinar. And some people started working in the sales and marketing area for this webinar, and other people started working in the marketing webinar for this area because they hadn't defined what the purpose of each of these working spaces was. That led to duplicate or copy of content. So they found they had a copy of the deck for the webinar, both in the sales and marketing area and also in the marketing webinar area. So no one was confident of which was a single version of the truth. And because they weren't in the same room, what we saw then is that people started to work in data silos. So various teams worked in different ways, even though they were using the same platform. And it made it very difficult when people had to work across teams on a collaboration project because they started working in different ways. And they said, look, we need help untangling this. And we said, that's great, we can help you because that's what we do. So let's take a step back and let's have a look at the document lifecycle and understand how you create your documents to all the way through to when they're actually deleted. So in the context of what we're going to talk about today, we've picked up 4 typical scenarios, and we're going to dive in and out of these scenarios as part of our demos. So the first one is, it's a classic HR piece. It's around, and it doesn't have to be HR, but it's around publishing policies. So you have an annual leave policy, for example, or maternity leave policy. So how can we manage that in SharePoint? And we're thinking about, moving on from the days where you might have a Word document on the HR folder, and then you turn that into a PDF, and then you maybe put it into a more public folder. The second piece is personnel records, obviously very sensitive information. Only certain people should be able to see certain things. And also part of those records is, well, how long do you hold those records for? You might have a policy saying we must hold employee data for X years after they've left the company, but then we want to make sure that it's destroyed appropriately. The third scenario, and we see this a lot around CVs, and if you're involved maybe in bringing on people into your organization, that recruiters will send you CVs, and part of that is, well, we need to hold those for a period of time because we want to make sure we're not getting the same CV from a different maybe recruiter and then maybe being charged twice. But on the flip side, we don't want to hold that data forever, because then we've got a GDPR risk. We're holding personal data for longer than is strictly necessary. And then the last scenario, and these scenarios are sort of intertwined as we talked this morning, is, if I'm in the sales, maybe delivery team, how do I create a proposal? How do I use the right template? How do I bring the right people in to build that proposal out? And how do we get it approved and shared? So we talk about the life cycle of a proposal as well. So Ben, I'm going to hand over to you. Maybe you could talk us through, the document life cycle.
Yeah, no, that's thanks, Rupert. That's perfect. So if we think about the document lifecycle, we need to think all the way through from how documents initially get created, all the way through to how they, eventually will get archived or deleted. Obviously, at the start is the creation of a document. So what we're thinking about, sometimes it is just as easy as firing up Word and starting to create a new document, but we want to make sure that they're created consistently, and we want to make sure that they're using the right template. If you've got a branded letterhead, for instance, that you've gone through and put some effort on, you want to make sure that that brand is carried through. So we start with creation, and then we'll move on to the collaboration phase. Some of you, I imagine, are quite familiar with Teams, and Teams is all about collaboration, and effectively SharePoint is the backbones of Teams when it comes to collaborating on documents. So being able to submit a document out for review and get some feedback, if you've historically had to go and send a document via email and get lots of different people and collate those responses, you've experienced this pain. So the process of creating and then collaborating and getting some input on your document is really key. However, once those documents have been collaborated on, inevitably they'll have to go through some form of review and approval process. Let's say it is a proposal that we were talking about. You want to go and get that sign off from the appropriate person so that they've gone and had their input and it's actually been submitted. Once those documents have been approved, to start thinking about how do we sort of archive and file those documents and make them easy to find. So if it's a list of contracts, for instance, or existing policies, how do you actually go and find them when you need them, so you can refer back and meet certain certain requirements, or be able to go and review stuff. So the ability to actually manage and search for your documents and actually store them in a way that makes them easy to recover is really valuable. And then finally, what are your actual compliance requirements that you need to follow? So how long do you need to keep documents for? Let's face it, we'll all say, yes, we need to keep employee documents for 7 years, but actually, how are you implementing that? And how are you actually making sure that that document is kept for 7 years, other than being perhaps stored in a backup or saving a sort of offline file copy somewhere? And of course, once those retention periods have been met, how are you ensuring that documents are actually disposed of so that you don't keep them longer than you need? We talked about the sort of GDPR scenarios of keeping documents more, no longer than you actually have to. So that's what we're thinking about when we refer to the document lifecycle, creation through to disposition. So one of the key aspects around this is defining your information architecture, which we'll come on to a little bit more in a second. But think of your information architecture as the foundations of how you manage your content and your information within your organization. So, historically, it might have been how you've structured your file shares. Whereas now we're thinking about how we structure our teams and sites and sort of intranet areas. Rupert, do you want to touch on the other two?
Yeah, and I think you put all this work in place and making sure your information, you've structured your hierarchy in the right place, you've got your process defined, but then adoption is the key of making sure that people are working consistently following this process through the organization. And that can mean different things to different people. It might mean that you have champions for certain teams. It might mean that some people prefer online training, some people prefer to go and watch videos. And so it's about understanding those different learning styles and making sure that that everyone's working in the same way. The final point is evolution, and we see, I guess, three key pieces around evolution. The first is that maybe the environment that you work in changes, maybe the regulations have changed, and therefore you need to change your process. So that is one trigger for change. The second trigger is that your organization might change the way it works or find a better way of working. So consider, what you design today might not be appropriate in a year's time and may require just a little bit of tweaking to bring it back on track. And the final point, and really, a big part of change in what we're talking about today, is how technology is changing. So some of you may have seen that Microsoft have made some AI, artificial intelligence announcements over the last week about how they're going to be more intelligent about how they understand your documents and how they classify their documents. So removing some of the, the human steps, which we might be talking about today, may not be appropriate in, 6 months' time. So bringing that together, we've now got, more of our document management story. And these are the things that we consider when we look at document management. So Ben, information architecture, what's all that about?
Yeah, so I think as I just mentioned, your information architecture is your sort of underlying foundation of how documents are going to be managed and stored in the organization. Do you want to just jump onto the next slide for me, please? So we think of this in three sort of pillars or three sort of corners of a triangle. And the first and most important is the people. So you need to think about what are the types of people in your organization. As we move down and to the right, we're thinking about content. So what kind of people need to access what types of content? If we think of a policy, then everyone will probably need to be able to review that policy, but only a certain group of people will need to be able to amend or modify those policies. Again, if we think about disciplinary records within a HR area, the type of person might be a HR team, and that type of content is disciplinary records, and that needs to be really, really sensitive. So that leads quite nicely onto that the third corner of the triangle, which is the permissions or access. Now, we've done this as a sort of padlock to highlight permissions and restricting who can access what. But actually, the other way of thinking it, of course, is actually ensuring that the right people get access to the right content at the right time. So it might not always be about stopping someone from accessing something, but it's also partly about ensuring that the right person can easily find something. If you're a manager, you need to be able to find all of the manager appraisal forms and access those more quickly. So ultimately, all of this wraps together in the sort of idea around findability. And actually, perhaps a slightly overused term nowadays, but it all leads to productivity. So if you've got the right people, have got the right content, and can't access the things that they shouldn't do, and can access the things that they need to be able to, that's going to make everyone effectively more productive in your organization. So if we just move on to the next slide and think about a couple of takeaways on this. When we're going through a process of defining our information architecture, the first step is to actually go and categorize the different roles of people you have. So what are those user personas? What are the types of people? And what kind of content do they need to be able to access? So instead of just saying everyone can access everything, it's making sure that Joe Bloggs has got access to the key documents that is going to make him effective. And again, what are the types of permissions that we need to ensure are applied to those contents so we don't have the wrong people accessing the wrong thing?
Okay, so last slide, I promise you, and we're going to dive into this. So I'm thinking about that. When I created a document, I might be lazy and I might go and find the last one which was similar to this. And obviously the problem with that might be that it's got maybe last year's terms and conditions in. It might not have, some kind of Brexit clause in it, and it's going to have the other client's name all the way through it. So there's three of the problems that we've all faced, and I'm sure many of us have sent out documents with the wrong client's name in. So how can I, quickly start go in the right direction without having to think, now where is the last good copy of that, and how do I make sure that I don't make a mistake of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rupert, this is all about having the right document templates. And what we're going to show through a bit of a demo is how you can really sort of take this concept of having standard document templates and actually make it a lot more effective. So let's just go and fire up the demo, if you wouldn't mind. Jump into our SharePoint. I think before we go too far on this, what we just wanted to highlight, this is obviously not a webinar about intranets, but what we're just highlighting here is our company portal and how, as a homepage, this brings together the key things. So just very quickly, your homepage will have some important news stories. It's got links to the important tools that you need to access more frequently. If you have a little scroll down, we've got things like any upcoming events. So it could be a webinar such as this, or it could be a company, a virtual meeting that you're going to run. And then we go to the bottom, we'll see any, perhaps it's your company Twitter feed that you want to promote internally as well as externally. Then the other thing that I just want to draw attention to is in this middle section here, Rupert, if you could scroll down, please, is the My Work area. So what we're actually doing is on the homepage, bringing the documents that I'm working on, I've either modified or I've created, and actually bringing that straight through to the homepage. So I'm quickly able to get to the stuff that I need to access more efficiently, and it's very much user-centric. The other thing that we're just going to highlight actually is if you go and hover over the navigation at the top, again, we're demonstrating that information architecture in the context of our company portal. So on the left, you've got that all company information, vision and values, the staff directory, all that standard stuff. As you move over, you've then got the resources that people need. So again, the policies and procedures, the templates, branding, documents, etc. Then we go into the workspaces, which is where we're narrowing down into those places of work where individual team members will work. And that could be either a Microsoft team or a SharePoint site, depending on what you're doing. And then finally, those external tools that we would access. So that's enough in terms of the company portal, but it just sort of sets the scene here. So what we're going to do now is go to the templates and images area. And what we'll see on this is that we have created some published templates. We haven't got a lot in here because it is a demo, but one of the things that we want to highlight is the commercial document template. Now, historically, in an intranet scenario, you would have documents saved to an intranet like this. And if you wanted to make sure that people use the right letterhead or the right commercial document, they have to go and navigate to the website like this and go and access and download that document. And of course, invariably they don't. They find those shortcuts that we've just talked about. But what we're going to demonstrate with this is actually in modern document management, how that comes straight to the place where you do your work, which in this case is Microsoft Word. So Rupert, do you want to open up Word for me, please? Let's go and start a new document, I think. So we're going to go new. And then what we can see here in our fictitious company called Contoso, those documents that we've just been published, we've just pointed you to, have actually come through straight into Word itself. So I can see the project start form. In our case, I'm interested in the commercial document. So we're just going to click on that. And it's actually brought the template with the right branding and the right section heading straight into the place that I need it to be, instead of having to go and download it. So there's no excuses for not finding that right template. It's straight in Word where it needs to be. So we're just going to fill out a few bits and bobs in here. So we'll put the title in. The other thing that we can see is that we've got a placeholder for the client name. You can see that highlighted. So why don't we just go and fill out the client name, Rupert, from the information pane here. So what we're demonstrating is the use of metadata to tag the document with the right client, and this will minimize the chance of actually having misspelling the client name. So we're using the predefined list of clients that we're working with, which you could feed from a CRM system, for instance, pull that straight through into the document. And if we go back, we've tagged it in the right way, and now that client name has actually come through. Any other placeholders in the rest of the document, the way you've referenced that client name, will all be updated. So again, no excuses for getting that wrong. So we've put the client name in, we've given it a title, but now what we pretty quickly want to do is actually go and save that document into Microsoft 365. So we're going to click on File, go Save As, or Save. Now you've got a couple of choices. So you could actually just save it straight into your work OneDrive if you wanted to, if you weren't quite ready to share this. We've actually got a pre-existing commercials area. So we're going to go and do that, save it into the commercials library. If we go into the subfolder there, into the folder we've created for the given customer. And save that. Perfect. Stage 5. Are you sure you've got that name right, Rupert? Oh no, okay, yeah, no, I think I have in this case.
It actually looked like it should have been stage 3. So yeah, that's one of the great little annoyances, I guess, of the on-premise file system, is that renaming files you can only do when everyone's come out of it. So within SharePoint, actually, you can rename it at any point, and that works both within the Fit client here, which is Word installed on the desktop, but also the web version as well, which is the lighter version of Word. And I think the other thing just worth adding on the client name, a lot of organizations, when we've seen them, some people use things like Duobank, somebody might use Duobank Ltd, some might write limited, some might PLC. So you might use that method to make sure that you're using the right legal entity of an organization, particularly when some organizations you may only contract with one entity, but it might not be the public name as that organization is known as.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the other thing, if we just have a quick look at the top right of Word here, we can see now we've actually saved that document. The auto save functionality is on. So if you're not okay, so if you're not using and storing documents in Office 365 already, and you're still thinking about contemplating the move, and you're still using the file system, the real power of Office 365 is that you're no longer going to lose your documents or lose your work because Word crashed after an hour. As soon as you saved it into OneDrive or SharePoint, it's going to save automatically. If you've been using Teams already, then you'll be familiar with this. But what we're highlighting is you don't just have to use Teams to get the benefit of this. And the other thing that Rupert's just highlighted is, again, now that you've saved that document into Microsoft 365, you've immediately got access to the version history. So anytime you make a change, you'll be able to see, get that previous version back and review it if you want to. So let's just sort of wrap that up and jump back with a quick demo of sort of version history in the context of Office 365 here. So one of the things we want to highlight to you, you can see in this screen here, the version of the commercial document is actually being highlighted as 2.1. When we open the template, we were accessing what's referred to as the most recent published version, but actually commonly when you're working on documents, you'll be preparing perhaps a new version of a document, perhaps that needs to go through review, perhaps the next version of a policy, but you want everyone else to access the previous or the final version or published version of a policy. That's indicated by this version number here. So 2.1 indicates that this document is in draft. However, the demo account that just opened Word accessed the most recent published version. So if Rupert just clicks into the document here, we can say that this document template in the draft actually has this additional commercial document Q4 amendments. However, we didn't see that when we opened it from Word because we were accessing the most recent published version of that document. And now you don't have to maintain those in separate locations. It's all integrated, embedded in a single place. So should we just, oh, go on.
Yeah,
go on,
and I've just
yeah.
noticed this project start form is in the wrong place. So what's quite nice about SharePoint is now we've got a lot of that functionality you're used to on the traditional file system. So we've got drag and drop there, and I can move that file and bang, it's in the project templates. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. So easy to move documents around and drag and drop. So should we just go and summarize this section, I think?
Yeah, let's crack on. So yeah, number one is that do that bit of work to define your templates. And I think my other advice is make sure you've got that kind of generic template. So which might be, you know, the quick document, which might just simply have your logo in the top hand corner and got the right fonts in. And then you might have some more generic report templates and maybe some very specific templates, which you could group in folders for ease of access. Train your people to start with a template rather than just the blank document which Word pops up when you open Word. It's not a big change. It's simply going file new. And then saving. See, save early and save in the cloud. And then we've got that auto save functionality. If you're not sure where to go, put it in your own OneDrive, and we can always move it later into the right place. And if you are sure, then naturally put it in the SharePoint or the appropriate team working area. So to keep cracking on, Ben, we created this document, but when we're creating these documents, often I need help from other people to help me get there. So we need to collaborate on these documents. And once we get there, I'm looking for some approval, which doesn't look like printing and signing it off or sending it backwards and forwards email. There must be a better way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're just going to quickly touch on the collaborate aspects of this first. So if you use Microsoft Teams to work on documents, you'll be reasonably familiar with this, but we're just going to show this from a SharePoint perspective. So Rupert, do you want to jump back to that proposal that you just created and saved? So what we're going to do now is actually use the share button to actually go and invite someone else to come in and work on that document with us. As I mentioned before, if you've ever had to go and email documents out to a group of people to get some feedback and have the pain of having to collate all of those changes and then realize that Joe Blogs had the wrong version, etc., and you're trying to sort of compile everything around this. My wife, for instance, who worked in the NHS, she has had that experience and found it really, really painful. And yes, it's a big time saver being able to use this co-authoring functionality. So Rupert's now just gone and shared this document with our fictitious colleague. I'm going to go and sign in as him. So if you just bear with me 1 second. So I can see that that document's just been shared with me. I'm just going to go and click into it. And what we'll see on the screen come up in a second is that our colleague Diego has now actually come in and started working on that document with us. And if I just jump down to the summary section as well, I can actually start modifying the cost section of this document. So you can see, as I click in, you can see a little cursor has appeared underneath cost. Diego is going to modify the cost section of this proposal. So I'm typing away, working on section 1.3. Rupert can be working on section 1.1, and it's a much quicker way of pulling a document, a proposal, particularly those documents that have quite a quick turnaround time. You know, sales-focused documents can often be under a bit of pressure to get them out quickly. The other thing that we do just want to highlight, the ability to actually @mention people in comments. So Rupert, do you want to just demonstrate that? So we go and add a new comment. If we go and @mention our colleague or someone else, for instance, it's quite a nice way of actually drawing someone's attention when they need to do something. And actually, the person that you @mention will in fact receive an email that says someone's actually mentioned you in this document, and it will take you straight through straight through to that document. So I think, as I said, this is quite familiar if you're using Teams already, but what we're highlighting is that you can just do this straight from Word by pressing share. But what I think we're going to go and do now actually is look at that review and sign off process, Rupert. So do you want to go and jump into the commercials library there for us?
Cool. So I'm here as Megan, as you can see the little face up here, and let's dive straight into the commercial library.
We just go and click on it. Yeah, that's it.
So we're working on Duobank, and this is for stage 3, and that's the P3 reference I put in earlier. So Ben, yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, when we actually look, as you probably see, Rupert's just close it down. The first thing you see when you go into these libraries is the information pane. So that will give you a lot of information around who's got access, any metadata, etc. But that's just, it's worth having a quick look at that. Let's just shut that down again, Rupert, as you had done already. Now, what we can see on here is that this document has got a column called sign off status. And actually, we've got one document that's pending and another document that's approved. So Rupert, we need to get this document approved now. So why don't we go and send this off to our other fictitious colleague called Nesta. Very American names, but that's absolutely fine. So we're going to go and send this off to our colleague. So we've just started a sign-off process directly within the document. It's going to send it off to our colleague Nesta with a bit of a message that we want to send them. And then we're just going to press run flow. Now, of course, one thing to highlight around this is that actually this is a very default approval where you pick who it is that's going to do the review. However, it is possible to go and define your own business rules. So it could be things like if it's this client, it needs to be approved by this account manager, or if it's more than a certain amount, it needs to go to director level approval. So these business rules can be pulled together in a slightly more bespoke process. But let's go and have a quick look at the email that Nesta will have received. So there's that flow that's just been sent through. Perfect. So what we're looking at here is an email that has some buttons on it. This is actually referred to as an active card. It means that you can interact with this email and control the flow approval process directly without having to go off to a separate system. This works both in the online versions of Office here. It works in the Outlook client, as long as you've got Office 365 version of Outlook, and it even works on the mobile mobile phone. So if you're using Outlook on your mobile phone, you'll be able to see this as well. It has a link to the document, a quick message, and then Rupert can actually go and approve the document in line straight away. Once it's done, you can see that that email has even updated itself. So if you were to go back and review your previous emails that have done, you know, your approvals, etc., you could see, oh, I have actually actioned that because the status of the email itself has changed. So let's just jump back and see what that looks like in our commercial library now. So you can see, actually, now that we've gone and pressed approve from the email, that's gone and updated the approval sign-off status straight into the commercial area. And as I said, you can tie additional rules around this, like perhaps notify the original author that this has been completed, or even sort of lock it in some way. So, Rupert, should we just go and summarize what we've been talking about in this section?
Yeah, and what I like, maybe if you use older versions of SharePoint, is no longer do you need to refresh the page to get that latest information. It just updates the page automatically in line. So, a few takeaways: the co-authoring and sharing. Consider using the app mentions to bring other people in, particularly if you want them to work on a certain part of a document. Think about security before you share, because if you are sharing documents, if they don't have access, you're going to get that access granted to that end user. And you might consider tenant level, so that's your whole Office 365 installation, or site level security settings, because you might not want to share with external parties or people outside your organization, maybe certain areas, say HR, but other areas you might be working on a joint venture and it's very appropriate to do so. The approval stuff Ben touched on, so the simple approval you just saw there, that works out the box, that's available to you. But customer approvals are available, so you might want approvals for, you know, certain scenarios, as Ben touched on, you know, maybe certain contract values, and they can all be applied. So we can look at that, you know, the advanced workflow to help your business. But I think my one takeaway or piece of advice from what, you know, we've seen on the field is that don't go overboard with approvals, because after a while people won't actually read the documents and will just approve things blindly. So think about before you request approval. So Ben, moving on, managing and finding living documents. So for me, these are those documents which are policies, procedures, things maybe like ISO, where you know you've got the first version approved and it's live, but you know you're going to have to review it again in a year because you need to make sure it's still fit for your business. It could be a risk assessment. HR is another classic area of policy procedures. So what I see people do is, there's a lot of people who run Excel spreadsheets to manage these documents, but there must be a better way, because then you've got this kind of, you know, unlinked link between the Excel and the Word documents, and often they get out of sync with each other.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a common scenario. With what we're demonstrating here is you've moved to the cloud, but you've carried over your, or one has carried over their existing processes for managing documents. So yes, okay, you've got everything in the cloud, but you're still using a spreadsheet or an Access database to track which documents need to be reviewed and updated on certain timeframes. So we're going to demonstrate how you can much more easily streamline that. So Rupert, let's just go and fire open our world again, our fictitious company portal, and we're going to go into the policies area this time, policies and procedures. I think before we demonstrate the process of managing the live documents, actually what we want to highlight here, policies and procedures is a really good example of where there's actually multiple roles or personas that need to access this content. So the first persona is actually everyone in the organization that needs to consume these policies and be able to find them quickly and easily. And so what we're highlighting on the homepage of this policies area is a search-based experience where you can search for the documents that you're looking for. So we'll let Rupert go and enter in home working, for instance. So you can search for the documents that you're looking for, but then also use what are referred to as search refiners to be able to narrow those results down. So let's say actually we want the procedure for the home working policy. We can use this concept of search refiners. If you've ever searched for something or bought anything on Amazon, which I'm sure you must have done, you would search for a particular product and then quite often use the filters on the right hand side to narrow down, or left hand side, to narrow down what you're looking for based on particular brand name or price category, etc. So these additional tags of information can be used in document management to narrow down those results. The other thing that's really nice about this, if you want to just click on that preview that you're poised hovering over there, we can actually see a preview of the document in line without having to go and download it and, you know, download that 50 meg document and see if it's actually the thing that you wanted to. If you don't like that experience, you can go and even expand this and it will just go and pop it open straight into the online viewer there. So let's just go and do that. So yeah, you can just quickly go and review, is this the document I'm actually looking for? Can I get access to that content? So it's very easy and user-centric to consume the content that you need. But as we said, this is a process around managing those documents. So let's flip it around to that person that is responsible for keeping these up to date. Rupert, do you want to jump into the site contents area and go into the underlying documents area, documents library?
Yeah, so we're very much of an administrator type view. It's administrator of a documents rather than your IT administrator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. It's the sort of content owner concept. There's a couple of things that if you're not familiar with this, I just need to draw your attention to. The first thing is that we're actually using some grouping in this document library to group the document policies based on categories. So in our case at the moment, we've only got one policy under finance. I'm sure there's plenty more. We've got a few more policies under the human resources area, for instance. So we can easily group documents to make it a little bit easier to narrow down what we're looking for. The other thing that we can see on here is that we've got some additional columns. So we've got a next review date. I do appreciate it's perhaps a little bit faint coming through on the screen here, but we can see that these documents themselves have got a column that flags up when they need to be reviewed next. We can see that they've got an owner assigned. So, you know, with these living documents, they always will need to have some form of owner or group of owners that's responsible for keeping them up to date. And then we've got a policy status. So if you have a look at that, perhaps group by policy status there, Rupert, what we can see here is that we've also used some conditional formatting on this library that says, you know, based on the policy status, let's make that visually, you know, more apparent of what's going on. So we've got review upcoming means that those policies need to be reviewed within the next month. And we've got needs review has been highlighted in red, which is where actually the review date is beyond, you know, the current date is beyond the next review date. So they really need to be addressed. So one more thing I do want to highlight here is we need to introduce a concept called document sets. So document sets are basically folders that allow you to attach additional metadata. So let's say if we think of a scenario, often with a home working policy, for instance, if we click into that, it's not just the policy itself, but those policies will have supporting documents like the procedures or SOPs that need to be followed. They might have some forms that need to be filled in. They might have a sign-off sheet that you know shows some evidence of who it was that updated it more recently. So there's actually a kind of package of documents that are all lumped together into this single logical entity called the human resources policy. So this document sets allows you to apply metadata such as the review date, the policy owner, and the status to all documents that sit within it. However, the other thing that we do have, if you click on document type and group by that, some documents or some columns can be applied individually. So within the home working policy document set, actually each individual document will have a specific document type of form, policy, or procedure. So that's just a quick summary of document sets and having metadata that will apply to all of those documents instead of having to maintain a separate spreadsheet. What we're now going to do is show you how we can use some Power Automate to actually manage that process of sign off. So what we've done actually with this home working policy is we can see it's in red because the next review date has expired. Rupert, can you jump back up a level, please? Go to documents if that's okay, so we can see all of those in context.
And I think Ben talks a lot about metadata. It's these fields here, which are typically the fields that you'd see in your separate Excel spreadsheet. So we brought that all together. That Excel spreadsheet's now gone.
Yeah, exactly that. So what we've got with this home working policy, we can see it needs review and its actual policy owner is Nesta. So a little bit of a Blue Peter moment here for those that are familiar. If we just jump over to our Nesta web browser, please. what we can see in, we've already submitted. Oh,
there we go. Right, here we go. Yeah,
that's it. Okay. So what we can see, we've got a slightly different approval request that's come through. In this case, we've got a little bit more than just approve or reject. We've actually got, I appreciate it's a little bit contracted there, but we've got approved, we've got temporarily approved, we've got needs amendment, and we've got rejected expired. So it could be, for instance, that document is no longer relevant. So we would reject it and therefore expire it because it's been merged into something else. What we're going to do is use the temporarily approved flow here. So this review would have been kicked off automatically based on recognizing it's gone beyond a certain date. We're going to go and press the button for temporarily approved. And what we're going to do now is just jump back to the SharePoint library for a second. And actually, that's even happened. Yeah, okay, so Rupert's just refreshed the screen. We can now see that the home working policy is no longer flagged up for action. Its status is now current, and actually the next review date has automatically been pushed forward by 3 months. So because Rupert chose temporarily approved, we've configured this with our own rules that says temporarily approved means it needs to be reviewed within 3 months, whereas approved would be actually it doesn't need to be removed and approved until next year. So we've been able to configure this quite simply in our Power Automate steps there and tie that back in. And as you saw, when Rupert pushed that button, that's just gone and automatically updated the status of that policy.
excellent, Ben. And what I think, just to summarize there, as you can see, each of these documents have now been updated about new information. So we're not going into every document, update. So we're making it a lot more efficient. And also reducing the risk of, forgetting to update one of these areas and therefore creating maybe inconsistent or incorrect data.
Yeah, exactly.
So to summarize, think about the metadata that you could help manage your documents, and it will be different for different organizations. And obviously part of the power of SharePoint is that you can customize what that looks like. Do I need a free text field, or do I want maybe a predefined list of offices or departments or areas or customers? We also then touched on document sets. So how can I manage groups of documents easily? And you saw that there with those policies and procedures. And the third piece is around search refiners. So how can we configure search for how you work? So then going back to my previous example around metadata, you may want to have a filter based on, office, for example, or department or area. So you've got a lot of flexibility on actually how you manage and find your documents. Because we know that search by itself simply doesn't work for everybody, but you might never kind of document.
And a question just in from Jackie is, when you approved that sort of master document there, can you just explain why those other linked documents updated automatically?
Do you want to do that, Rupert, or shall I?
Yeah, it's fine. So, hi, Jackie. Thanks for the question. So we've got this thing called a document set, and it's indicated by this little icon here, which is kind of like a folder with a file. And what it means is anything that you change at this top level will automatically flow down to any document underneath it. So one of the fields that we have at the top level is policy status, as you can see is current. And so what that will do is when we go into that area for home working, the policy status will automatically be updated. Now, part of the work we do is understand which of these fields need to be updated from the top down and which of these need to stand by themselves. So for example, we wouldn't want to change this document type field to the top level because each one of these is a different one. But some of that information is common. Does that answer the question, Jackie? Does that help?
I might just add to that as well, actually, just with an example. So historically, what you might have had to do is go and submit each of those 3 documents, the policy, the procedure, and the form, independently through an approval process, even though they're actually all part of the same thing, would all be reviewed at the same time. Technically, you'd have to go through and run that approval process on multiple times, which is actually not particularly great user experience. So what we highlighted is that we can run the approval process once for the group of documents as a whole that make up that human resources home working policy. It can be approved in bulk, and that will actually go and flow through to all of the documents. And it's basically saves time and makes you makes the process a lot more efficient and easy to manage.
And look, Jackie, happy to do an extra, 5 or 10 minutes at some future point if you want to do a bit of a deep dive into that. Okay, so conscious of time, I'm going to keep Cracking on. So Ben, the final piece is obviously retention disposition. So retention, how long are we going to hold a document for? Doesn't mean we necessarily delete it at the end, but we know we're going to keep it for a minimum of that period. And the position is the opposite of that is when must we delete this by? So if it hasn't been deleted or removed already, how do we make sure it actually is removed?
Yeah, exactly. So let's just go straight into the demo. I think the first thing we're going to do is close the loop on the HR scenarios we talked about. So let's just go and jump into our HR area of our company portal here. So human resources.
There we go.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we can see, let's just go and expand the staff records for a second. So this is quite common in a HR sort of inner working area where you might have a folder or even a document set, as we've just introduced, for each individual within your organization. Obviously, permissions and security is really important in this and making sure that only the right people have got access to what. And you might even have dedicated areas that are for the directors, perhaps because they need to be kept separate and only the HR director can view the company owners or managing directors documents. Let's just jump into Adele here. What we can see on one of these documents already, we've got a pay review document, and that's actually got a metadata concept called a retention label applied. So you can see those staff records has been added to this document. And actually, if you just come off of that and so unhighlight it a second, you can actually see that there's a little padlock that's next to that document. So let's just go and open up the information pane for this library, please, Rupert, if that's okay. So let's just go and do that and click back onto that document again. That's it. And if we have a little scroll down into the information pane here, we can see that the record apply retention label has got a record called staff records applied to it. And actually the record status is locked. It can no longer be modified. You can't accidentally delete it. You can't go into it and accidentally update it. You don't have to go and save all of your documents or print them off and sign them as PDFs to make sure that you've got a locked version of a document. We basically just apply a label to it and it's now locked. Should we have a look at that at the other document you've got in there, Rupert? So this document doesn't currently have a retention label. So let's have a look at our options. So we've created a couple of different labels here. The first one is only purely because it's alphabetical. The first one is a disciplinary record. So let's think of that scenario where it's a disciplinary letter. You need to, again, lock that record. There's a compliance obligation to keep it. But unlike general personnel records, perhaps you say we will delete them automatically after 3 years. So it's left, it's gone from their record. So we can say disciplinary record is retained for 3 years. And actually we've got an additional configuration around that says after those 3 years, it will automatically be disposed of and got rid of. Whereas the general staff records, it might be things like your, I don't know, a pay slip or probably more likely things like, a staff contract or,
pay review letter, for example, then
pay review or a passport scan, for instance. You would apply the staff record concept that says we'll keep it for 7 years. After that, we will go through a review process or just leave it there, but we need to make sure that at an absolute minimum it is maintained and kept for 7 years. So we've created those records or published them to this library, so you can go and apply it as Rupert has just done. Again, if you just click out of that, we'll see that that lock has now been applied. And if you go and click into that document, Rupert, we can actually see you're going to be blocked from even editing that document in the user interface here. So it's now in reviewing mode. You can see the editing capability has been switched off. No one can modify that document. The other place where actually this could be relevant, in our commercial scenario that we talked about before, that is another case of where, you could have at the end of the sign-off process that we talked about, it automatically goes and applies a commercial document record. So again, instead of having to go and print off and sign statements of work or signed contracts, for instance, and PDF them back, you can just go and apply that record to it and know that you've got the original defined version of that document. So that's records applied in the HR scenario, and we've touched up on commercial. The other thing that we just want to demonstrate is this sort of idea around CVs and recruitment. So Rupert, can you just go into our recruitment? In this case, actually, we're going into a Microsoft team. So you just go use the web app instead. So we've actually created a recruitment team, and in this we've got an area where we want to receive and discuss and collaborate on CVs. So perhaps if you just show that in the teams list there along near the bottom, I think it is. So we've got a recruitment team. We've created a channel called Incoming CVs, if you're familiar with Teams already. And one of the things that we're using here is the ability to send an email to Microsoft Teams. So we just went get email address, copied this. It's not a very nice looking email address, but instead of receiving CVs to an individual inbox or to an individual person, which you've then got to go and find and delete, you can actually go to your recruiters and say, don't send us CVs here, send them to this email address that we're going to give you, which, you know, that is how we want to work with you. So whenever they send you a CV, it will automatically come through into this channel. You'll see the email come through and it actually will go and extract that attachment. So let's just jump into the files area, please. Any attachments and emails that come into a channel are saved into that underlying email messages folder. As you can see, the CV has been extracted, so you can review and collaborate. You could go and share it to colleagues internally, hiring managers that need to review it, for instance, all standard Teams and SharePoint functionality. But the other thing that we want to do now is let's just go and pop open in SharePoint, please, Rupert. What we'll see is if we just jump up to the incoming CVs folder in the hierarchy there and just go and click on the information pane again. Well, actually, you've applied it there, which is great. We're doing the information pane. What we've done is apply a retention label called recruitment to all documents that come into the incoming CVs channel. So this is where, if you're just using Teams, you may not necessarily be that familiar with how SharePoint can support and enhance the functionality of Teams. But by knowing about it, we've popped open SharePoint and applied this retention concept or disposition concept to all documents that come into that channel. And it means that we can keep them for 6 months, for instance, as our compliance regulations, and making sure that we don't, you know, have any conflicts with other recruiters, but then we can automatically dispose of them after 6 months. So we're no longer worried about, you know, having CVs scattered over people's inboxes that you've got to try and dig out, and be worried about your sort of GDPR obligations.
Okay, there's just one question I've just seen from Jackie. Do you need to create a new email account for this? No, you don't, Jackie. Email accounts in Teams are quotes free. So just to summarize, so number one is, before you start clicking away, understand what your compliance obligations are, how long you need to keep information. That's going to come from different parts of your organization. Number two is then define those from a technical perspective and the publish of them. So you might have different labels for different areas of your document management solutions. So the HR labels probably don't want to really appear in the commercial area. So, you know, what you'd want to do is define your information architecture to support that. And then how do you actually make sure that people use these? So we've seen a couple of ways. We've seen the manual method where we go in and change it by clicking changing the properties. We've also seen the second way by default. So anything which goes in a certain folder, which was a CV folder, automatically gets that label applied. And the third way can either be based on more custom business rules or workflow. So maybe once certain steps happen or certain things happen, maybe it's been approved, then it gets turned into a record. So it's not a record before then, but once it does, then certain maybe policies are applied.
It's worth mentioning just on that point about email addresses, as you say, when you create an email address on a Teams channel, it's a pretty ugly looking email address, but your IT administrator will be able to put a nice alias in there so that your exchange will automatically be able to handle something like incoming CVs at ramsack.com, for example. So if it is something you're going to publicly share with people like recruitment agents, it's a little bit more user friendly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dan. And so, I mean, from a demo perspective, that draws us to a close. Obviously, I don't know if there's any other questions I've missed there, Dan, or anyone got any questions they'd like to pop up, but we're here and we'll hopefully answer them either verbally or even through pointing and clicking if that's appropriate.
Yeah, no questions outstanding in the meeting chat. So we'll work on the 10-second rule and give people a chance just to pop a message in, or if you want to use the raise hand feature, if you want to bring yourself off mute and ask Ben or Rupert a question, then we'll do that. But I told you we'd finish at 12,
yeah.
and done, Ben and Rupert. You've come in with 3 minutes to spare, so thank you for that. So with no incoming questions, I think it's fair to say deliberately we've been a bit whirlwind here, because we wanted to show you concept rather than necessarily the step-by-step process of how you do some of this. We wanted to kind of, in an hour, which we were aware was all we had of your goodwill today, on a webinar, was we asked Ben and Rupert just to demonstrate sort of potential concepts so that you can start to think of SharePoint. And I think what Ben and Rupert have done really well today is just demonstrated that SharePoint is not just a file server replacement. You know, increasingly people are coming to us because they're on their cloud journey and they're looking at how do we switch off this traditional file server, and that kind of quick drag and drop of documents into SharePoint certainly ticks a box in terms of replacing file server. But it's hopefully what we've been able to demonstrate today is that SharePoint just goes so far beyond that, into kind of automating processes, streamlining processes, and putting compliance and good practice controls in place that really just sort of start to streamline the organization. So but it has been a whirlwind. It's been a kind of a show some concepts, and then we're more than happy to follow up individually afterwards with more information, sort of art of the possible type workshops for your organization, or just Q&As. So Ben, Rupert, thank you so much for brilliant demonstration, and well done for keeping the live demo fairies at bay as well. Everything seemed to work quite quickly. For now it's 12 noon, so we will end the call there. Thank you so much for your time. Very, very grateful for sparing an hour of your time. We hope that was useful, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon.